There's a strange restlessness spreading quietly across the world. Perhaps you felt it too. It visits people late at night, in the hours when the lights are out, but the mind refuses to sleep. It lingers in the moments when the phone screen goes dark, and you realize that all the scrolling, all the images, all the quick motivational quotes haven't touched the part of you that aches the most. It's not depression, though it feels heavy. It's not anxiety, though the heart sometimes races. It's something else, something quieter, something older. We're living in an age of spiritual fatigue, an era where the shelves of bookstores and the timelines of social media overflow with spiritual content, yet the soul remains unfulfilled. This book is born from that ache, from that strange hunger for something real, something ancient, something forgotten by modern language. For decades now, we've been fed a diluted version of spirituality. 5-step manifestation hacks, raise your vibration memes, sound bites of Eastern philosophy torn from their roots and sold like fast fashion for the soul. We live in a time where people can recite Rumi quotes without understanding the depth of Sufi mysticism, where meditation is reduced to a productivity tool, stripped of its spiritual marrow, where ancient oracles are turned into clickbait, and the divine is treated as some cosmic vending machine. And yet, we consume it all. We swipe, we double tap, we sign up for webinars, we buy the crystals, we say the affirmations, and still late at night, the emptiness returns, not because the divine has abandoned us, but because we've abandoned depth. This is not a book about giving you new rituals to replace old ones. It's about remembering. It's about walking into the vast archive of human spiritual history and dusting off the forgotten manuscripts, the neglected prayers, the outlawed philosophies, the dangerous questions that institutional religions, and now even pop spirituality, have tried to bury. In the pages that follow, we will trace the hidden pathways that run like underground rivers beneath the visible landscape of human belief. We'll visit the pre-Siberian shamans who spoke to the spirits of wind and stone, the Gnostic rebels who believed that the universe was not just created, but sabotaged, the mystic Sufis who wrote love poems to the infinite even as they stood on the edge of madness, the philosophers who dared to map the architecture of the invisible worlds. And yes, we will sit for a while with the strange, massive cosmology of the Urantia book, a text too big to ignore and too enigmatic to be labeled. We will weave these threads into a narrative, not academic, not doctrinal, but alive. This book does not pretend to hold ultimate answers. Instead, it will ask you better questions. Every ancient culture had words for what we are feeling now. In Sanskrit, viraha, the longing for the divine beloved. In Sufism, fana, the annihilation of the ego in search for union. In Greek philosophy, eros, the creative longing that pulls the soul toward beauty and truth. In Christian mysticism, the dark night of the soul, that terrifying silence between prayers. In modern psychological language, Carl Jung might call it the search for meaning beyond persona. In the Urantia book, it's framed as the action of the thought adjuster, the silent inner fragment of the divine, always whispering, always pulling you toward a higher orbit of selfhood. The words change. The hunger remains. You are not broken. You are not lost. You're being called. But called to what? That is the question that will follow us through every chapter of this book. Are we being called back to the old gods, or forward into some new understanding of the cosmos? Are these synchronicities just coincidences? Are these inner whispers psychological coping mechanisms? Or are they the soft fingerprints of something larger? Reaching out? To find out, we will have to look beyond surface spirituality. We will have to dive into uncomfortable histories, We will need to walk through shadows, question our beliefs, and sit with paradox. We will cross text banned and burned. We will visit philosophies that institutions labeled heretical. We will sit at the crossroads where science trembles before mystery. And we will not do this with fear. We will do it with reverence. The journey you're about to take is not linear. There will be no neat lists, no step-by-step formulas, no promises of instant enlightenment. What you will find instead is a woven landscape of thought and spirit, where each idea bleeds into the next, like ink on wet paper. The aim is not to give you a map with sharp, clean borders, but to offer you a compass, one sensitive enough to detect even the faintest shifts in the magnetic field of your own soul. You may notice as you read that names and concepts from widely different traditions begin to sound familiar, even when you've never studied them before. There's a reason for that. Long before books, before temples, before any formalized religion, human beings stared at the stars and asked the same questions we ask today. Who am I? Why am I here? What is this strange feeling that life is both incredibly small and infinitely vast at the same time? Across continents and centuries, shamans, mystics, poets, philosophers, and prophets all gave different answers. But beneath their languages, the questions remain the same. In the West, Plato spoke of another realm, a world of perfect forms behind the physical. In the deserts of the Middle East, the Essenes prepared for cosmic changes, believing in angelic hierarchies that shaped the destiny of humankind. In the jungles of the Amazon, tribal shamans drank bitter brews to dissolve the walls between dimensions. The Gnostics whispered that the material world was a flawed copy, a prison built by lesser gods, and that only inner knowledge, gnosis, could set the soul free. Meanwhile, in the Urantia book, a document that reads more like a cosmic engineering manual than a religious text, a vast celestial administration is laid bare, complete with universe architects, spirit supervisors, and fragments of deity embedded in the human mind. It may feel overwhelming. That's good. It should feel overwhelming. No single tradition can hold the entire mystery. Each is like a shard of stained glass. Only when you step back and let the light hit all of them together does the larger image begin to emerge. As you move through these pages, you'll notice that historical references blend with mystical reflections, and that philosophical questions are interlaced with personal anecdotes and experiential invitations. This is intentional. The intellect alone cannot cross the threshold to the invisible worlds, nor can pure emotion. What is needed is a weaving together of both, mind and heart, thought and intuition, knowledge and surrender. You will also notice that I refer to multiple sacred texts without privileging one over the other. The Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, the Gospel of Thomas, fragments from Nag Hammadi, and passages from the Urantia book will all appear, sometimes side by side. This is not spiritual tourism. This is archaeology of the soul. Each fragment is a fossil, a clue to what we have always been, long before languages divided us. There will be moments when you disagree. That's also good. Agreement is not the goal here. Engagement is. The goal is to stir something ancient inside you, something that remembers, something that listens not just with the mind, but with the bones, with the skin, with the electric edge of your breath. This is not about belief. It's about encounter, not about conversion. It's about conversation. Not about adding more doctrines to your bookshelf, but about clearing enough space inside yourself for the mystery to enter, on its own terms, not yours. Throughout this journey, I will sometimes share personal experiences, not because I think my story is more important than yours, but because we need living examples of how the invisible makes contact with the visible, how the unnamed sometimes whispers through strange synchronicities, impossible dreams, uncanny coincidences that make you stop mid-step on an ordinary afternoon and ask, what was that? These moments of rupture, small, barely noticeable at first, are where this book will dwell. Between the gaps, in the cracks of logic, in the pause between inhale and exhale. And as we step into the first chapter together, I ask only one thing from you. Keep your heart soft. Keep your skepticism sharp, but your wonder sharper still. And most of all, pay attention, because the invisible is already paying attention to you. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that modern language doesn't quite know how to name. It's not just tiredness of the body, nor the burnout of overwork. It goes deeper, curling itself around the edges of thought, wrapping its quiet weight around the spirit like a fog that no amount of sleep or self-care routines can lift. This is not a weariness that caffeine or vacations can solve. It's a spiritual fatigue, a collective soul sickness spreading silently through millions of lives at once. Everywhere you turn, there are promises of quick solutions. Flashy gurus with perfect lighting and algorithm-optimized wisdom fill our screens, offering 7-day challenges for inner peace or 30-second meditations for instant healing. The language of spirituality has been repackaged into bite-sized slogans, stripped of context, sterilized of history, and sold back to us like fast food for the soul. We consume it endlessly, hoping that the next affirmation, the next online workshop, the next crystal, the next carefully curated ritual kit will finally pierce the numbness that grows behind our ribs. But nothing seems to land. The rituals feel hollow. The mantras become mechanical. Even in moments of brief relief quickly evaporate, leaving behind that same dull ache, that same gnawing sense that something essential is missing. We swipe through motivational reels at midnight, hearing strangers with polished voices tell us that abundance is just a mindset, that trauma can be cleared with a single breath, that enlightenment is one more visualization away. Yet something deep inside us whispers, even as we click like, this isn't it. This isn't enough. The problem isn't that spirituality is being talked about more. The problem is the dilution, the relentless flattening of ancient, complex, soul-racking processes into marketable content. The sacred has been cut into pieces, stripped of its jagged edges, repackaged in pastel colors, and offered to a generation desperate for meaning but afraid of discomfort. Real transformation is messy. It's long. It demands surrender. It shatters identities before it rebuilds anything resembling peace. But that truth doesn't sell well. It doesn't fit into a 30-second video with background music designed to keep engagement high. And so we binge on spiritual content the same way we binge on junk food. Momentary hits of dopamine followed by a crash that leaves us emptier than before. What makes this more complex is that deep down, many of us know we're standing on the threshold of something bigger. There's a collective stirring, an undercurrent running through conversations and dreams and sleepless nights. People who never thought of themselves as spiritual are suddenly waking up with questions they can't explain. Synchronicities are happening with unnerving frequency. Old belief systems are crumbling, and people are being pushed, sometimes gently, sometimes violently, toward questions they don't have a language for. This is where the modern confusion deepens, because with awakening comes vulnerability, and in that vulnerability, we become easy prey for spiritual marketing machines that promise fast enlightenment. The hunger we feel is ancient, but the answers we're being fed are plastic. What we are collectively experiencing is what Carl Jung might have called an archetypal hunger, a profound psychic need for connection with the larger structures of meaning that exist beyond the ego, beyond culture, beyond even language. This isn't just about personal growth or emotional healing. It's existential. It's cosmic. It's the deep biological and spiritual call to remember that we are part of something infinitely larger than ourselves. But the modern world, obsessed with efficiency and speed, cannot digest mystery. And so we're told to manifest faster, meditate more efficiently, heal on a schedule, and keep smiling while doing it all. The ancient initiatory paths, the ones walked by mystics and seekers and shamans for thousands of years, knew better. They didn't promise ease. They promised transformation. They demanded it. The initiate had to descend into darkness, face their own annihilation, encounter the void, and only then, sometimes after years, emerge with even a fragment of clarity. Contrast this with today's spiritual industry, where shadow work is reduced to journaling prompts and ego death is spoken of like it's a weekend retreat activity. We're trying to speedrun processes that were never meant to be rushed. Yet beneath all this noise, the hunger persists. A deep, aching, almost gravitational pull towards something authentic, towards something raw, something that doesn't come with hashtags or influencers. People are starting to question, quietly at first, but the questioning is growing louder. They're wondering why, after attending all the workshops and buying all the books, they still feel hollow. They're noticing that despite the thousands of hours of guided meditations they've streamed, something essential remains untouched. We're not just waking up to spiritual possibilities. We are waking up to the terrifying realization that most of what we've been calling spiritual is performance. A performance we participate in because it feels better than staring directly into the void. But the void is exactly where the real work begins. And here's the paradox. The void is not empty. It only appears so to the untrained eye. Beneath the silence, beneath the existential vertigo, beneath the crumbling of false identities, something waits. Something intelligent. Something alive. Something patient. The fatigue you feel is not a sign that you're failing. It's a sign that you're being called, not to consume more, not to find better affirmations, but to stop, to listen, to surrender to the process that real transformation demands. The journey ahead will not give you shortcuts, but it may offer you something far better, a doorway into a different kind of seeing, a way of moving through the world that is less about accumulation and more about remembering. And maybe, just maybe, that ache in your chest will begin to soften. Not because it's gone, but because you'll finally understand what it was asking of you all along. The confusion that seems to accompany this collective awakening is not an accident. It's not a flaw in the process. It's part of the design. When old frameworks collapse, when the scaffolding of certainty falls away, what remains is disorientation. This is not a glitch in human evolution. It is the necessary vertigo that comes before new ground can be found. For thousands of years, spiritual traditions understood this phase. They built initiatory rites that intentionally placed the seeker in states of unknowing. They created spaces where the ego's illusion of control could safely unravel. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, the vision quests of indigenous tribes, the dark retreats of Tibetan monks. All of these rituals understood that confusion is the fertile soil where new awareness is born. Yet today, we treat confusion as failure. When the affirmations stop working or the meditations bring up more questions than peace, we think we're broken. We assume something is wrong with us. We turn to more content, more books, more teachers, more noise, layering information on top of wounds that were never meant to be bypassed. But confusion, when met with presence, becomes a portal. It is the space where cognitive structures soften just enough for deeper truths to slip through. In psychological terms, this is the collapse of the persona, the carefully constructed identity that allows us to navigate daily life, but often shields us from authentic experience. In mythological language, it is the descent into the underworld. The heroes fall from the known world into the realm of shadows, where treasures are hidden among dangers. In cosmological terms, the Urantia book speaks of this as the stage where the thought adjuster begins to intensify its guidance, not through external signs, but through a more profound interior friction. It's the gentle, relentless push from within that makes your comfort zones feel unbearable. It's the subtle rewiring of perception that makes the old answers seem hollow and the familiar paths suddenly unwalkable. This archetypal hunger we're experiencing isn't just personal, it's planetary. The sheer number of people reporting spontaneous spiritual experiences, unexplainable synchronicities, and existential crises points to something larger at play. We're not just a few lost individuals fumbling in the dark. We are part of a global recalibration. And with this recalibration comes a paradox. The more access we have to information, the more spiritually malnourished we seem to become. Knowledge, in its raw form, is not wisdom. And in an age where a Google search can deliver thousands of spiritual resources in seconds, the real scarcity is not content, it's depth. We are collectively mistaking quantity for quality, exposure for embodiment, intellectual familiarity for transformation. Reading about shadow work is not the same as doing it. Memorizing the stages of awakening is not the same as walking through them. Knowing the names of mystical states is not the same as living inside them. This is the gap we now stand in, the uncomfortable space between what we know intellectually and what we have actually integrated into our bodies, our relationships, our choices, our ways of seeing. But there is good news hidden within this discomfort. The very fact that you feel this hunger means something inside you is still alive, still reaching. The spiritual fatigue is not a dead end. It's a signal flare from your deeper self, a call to stop grazing on surface-level teachings and start digging, to find the places where real spiritual nourishment still exists, buried under layers of noise. This book won't give you all the answers, but it will invite you to ask better questions. Questions that burn, questions that unsettle, questions that act like keys, unlocking doors you didn't know were there. We are entering an era where the superficial will no longer sustain us, where slogans and sound bites will wither under the weight of real longing, where the path forward will not be a clean, well-lit staircase, but a dark forest trail with no guarantees, no maps, and only the faint glimmer of intuition as your guide. And that's exactly where you're supposed to be. There is a version of history that most of us were taught, a linear tale of progress, civilization, and order, guided by reason and refined through science, religion, and empire. It is a version of the past that paints the ancient world as either barbaric or simplistic, as if the minds of our ancestors could not possibly have touched the depths we now dare to explore. But beneath that clean timeline lies another current, quiet but insistent, like the whisper of water beneath stone. The official histories tend to silence what doesn't fit their design. They leave out what cannot be measured, categorized, or controlled. And in doing so, they have buried not only events, but entire ways of knowing. The mystical, the initiatory, the ecstatic, the cosmic, all were slowly erased from the record or dismissed as superstition. Yet these were once the heart of the human experience. What we call spirituality today was for ancient peoples a technology of reality, a means of perceiving, communicating, and aligning with invisible forces that were as real to them as gravity is to us. To modernize, these forces seem metaphorical, But to the pre-scientists of Egypt, to the shamans of the northern ice, to the oracular traditions of Greece, and to the desert mystics of early Islam, the spiritual world was not a belief. It was a map, a language, a system of engagement with the cosmos. The first traces of this can be found in places so old they almost defy comprehension. In the frozen stretches of Siberia, long before what we now call shamanism became a globalized term, there were ritual specialists who stood as mediators between the seen and unseen. These were not spiritual leaders in the modern sense, but functional travelers between dimensions. Their task was not to teach personal development, but to heal fractures in the relationship between the human world and the elemental intelligences that surrounded it. Their knowledge was embodied, experiential, and intimately tied to the landscape itself. They believed that rivers had consciousness, that stones could speak in dreams, that the wind carried messages if one listened with the correct ear. Initiation into their path was not earned through reading, but through survival, being struck down by illness, possessed by spirits, lost in wilderness, or shattered by vision. Only those who were unmade by the invisible had the authority to speak for it. Yet none of this appears in the pages of our mainstream history books. The indigenous technologies of the soul were overwritten by colonizing languages, reclassified as madness, erased by missionary zeal or clinical diagnoses. And yet, somehow, their echoes remain. You feel them sometimes when standing in forests that seem too quiet, when dreams arrive that feel older than your own memory, when grief takes the shape of an animal, or joy shatters you open with no warning. These are not hallucinations. They are invitations, called from traditions that once knew how to read the world, not as object, but as symbol. Far to the south, along the curves of the Nile, another kind of spiritual architecture emerged. The ancient Egyptians built their temples not merely as monuments of stone, but as containers for cosmic energy. Every line, every alignment, every chamber held meaning. Their rituals were not primitive gestures, but choreographies of light, intention, and sound designed to invoke the solar intelligences. To most modern minds, the sun is a ball of nuclear fire. To the initiates of the solar cults, it was a divine being, a radiant intelligence that poured consciousness into form. The daily rising and setting of the sun was not a mechanical orbit, but an ongoing myth enacted in real time, a sacred theater where light battled chaos and rebirthed order every 24 hours. Participating in this rhythm was not metaphor. It was transformation. Priests underwent decades of training to prepare their bodies and minds to receive the energies transmitted through heliacal alignments. Specific tones, symbols, and sacred geometries were employed not as aesthetic decoration, but as resonant keys, tools for tuning human consciousness to solar frequency. Today, most of these practices are dismissed as ornamental or obscured under layers of Egyptological reductionism. But fragments survive in the myths, the chants, the architecture. It is not just history that has forgotten. We have forgotten how to see. In another corner of the ancient world, the Greeks cultivated a different but equally profound relationship with the unseen. While we often remember their gods, their dramas, their epics, less attention is given to the daimonic. In modern usage, the word demon has become a sinister term, but to the Greek mind, a daimon was a personal spirit, a mediator between the mortal and the divine. It was believed that each person was born with a guiding daimon, a spiritual twin of sorts, whispering through intuition, inspiration, and sudden insight. Socrates himself claimed to hear his daimon speak, guiding his choices, refusing certain paths. These spirits were not worshipped, but dialogued with, honored as companions in the unfolding of one's destiny. They lived in the liminal spaces between thought and emotion, dream and action. In suppressing these concepts, modernity has amputated a vital part of human psychology. We no longer speak of inner guides or tutelary spirits without embarrassment. We've renamed them subconscious impulses or creative instincts, but the experience remains. The sudden clarity, the inexplicable knowing, the sense of being led. Perhaps our daimones never left. Perhaps we simply forgot their names. Far from the Hellenic world, in the early centuries of Islam, another mystical stream emerged, moving silently beneath the legalistic surface of religious orthodoxy. Sufism, before it became a romanticized trope, was a path of direct experience, fierce, ecstatic, rigorous. These early mystics were not interested in reciting doctrines. They sought annihilation of the self in the presence of the real. Before Sufism was institutionalized, it was raw and often dangerous. Figures like Al-Hallaj walked the edge of language and madness. His poetry did not aim to describe God, but to dissolve the speaker into God. He was executed for uttering Ana al-Haq, I am the truth, a statement that shattered the boundary between self and divinity. He wasn't claiming to be God. He was recognizing that the illusion of separation had dissolved, and that recognition terrified those in power. The early Sufis used paradox, poetry, and physical deprivation to collapse the ego and open the inner eye. Their practices were often secretive, transmitted orally, hidden in metaphors to protect both teacher and student. To read their works today is to encounter flames wrapped in paper. Beneath every line lies a fire meant to burn illusions. These are just fragments of what once was a vast and living spiritual ecosystem, one that spanned continents and cultures, rich in nuance, silence, and symbol. Much of it has been erased, diluted, or locked away in the vaults of forgotten languages. But some of it lingers, waiting, and if you listen carefully, some of it is already inside you. What we call inner guidance may not be modern intuition at all. It may be memory, a recall of tools and truths once known, now dormant in the body, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The idea that your soul carries embedded maps is not poetic. It is ancient. The Gnostics spoke of a hidden spark within each person, the Sufis of a hidden heart, the Egyptians of the BA, the soul that could fly. What if all of them were speaking in their own way about the same thing? What if the wisdom you seek is not somewhere out there, but encoded in the very architecture of your being? There is something unspoken in the way we respond to stories of ancient knowledge. Even those who claim not to believe in such things often feel a strange stirring when confronted with symbols, rituals, and forgotten languages that once carried the weight of transcendence. Perhaps it is because we are not simply learning new information, but remembering what was once carved into the roots of our collective soul. When we study the erasures of spiritual history, we begin to understand that forgetting is not a passive act. It is an active strategy, whether imposed by empire, institutional religion, or the machinery of modernity. What was forgotten was often too wild, too feminine, too intimate, too free. It did not fit within structures built to manage the sacred rather than surrender to it. We were told that the ancient ways were primitive or irrational, that mysticism was dangerous or childish, that truth must be verified through cold empiricism or ecclesiastical decree. And so we became afraid of our own inner knowing. But the body does not forget. The body remembers in ways that the intellect cannot, in dreams that seem to come from somewhere else, in sensations that defy language, in tears that arise during certain kinds of music or in moments of inexplicable stillness. These are not random. They are echoes of ceremonies we once performed, names we once chanted, patterns we once recognized as sacred. To reconnect with these inner archives is not to reject modern life. It is to live it with more dimension. To move through the world not as a passive consumer of pre-packaged meaning, but as a carrier of something old, something essential. This is not a romantic longing for the past. It is a return to a depth that never truly left us. It only went underground. And so the real task is not to find a new teacher or subscribe to the latest spiritual trend. The real task is to listen, to clear enough space in your awareness so that the forgotten voices within you can speak again. What if your discomfort, your longing, your moments of sudden resonance with texts and traditions you've never studied? What if those are not accidents? What if they're signals from your own deeper architecture? There is, within each of us, a constellation of spiritual memory waiting to be recognized. Not as content to be memorized, but as presence to be embodied. You may find that you're drawn to certain traditions without knowing why. That certain chants, languages, symbols, or philosophies feel familiar, even if you've never encountered them in this life. That certain dreams return with the same imagery over and over. These are breadcrumbs, markers, messages from the part of you that has never stopped walking the path, even when your conscious mind lost the map. You don't need to force this recognition. You don't need to claim titles or identities. The process is subtler than that. It begins with noticing, with feeling, with allowing, with naming the invisible only when it wants to be named. And it continues with a kind of listening that is not taught in schools or seminars, but that awakens slowly, like memory returning after a long sleep. Perhaps the archives were never truly lost. Perhaps they were only waiting for the quiet necessary to be heard again. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Ask yourself not what you believe, but what you remember, what you feel in your bones, in your blood, in the space behind your eyes when you are most still. Ask yourself what wisdom you have carried without knowing its name. What rhythms your heart recognizes as holy. What paths you've never studied, but somehow seem to know how to walk. Begin there. That is your first sacred text. To speak of invisible hierarchies is to immediately step into dangerous terrain. It evokes images of angels and demons, cosmic chessboards, ancient gods pulling strings behind the veil. For some, it may sound like mythology. For others, conspiracy. But across nearly every mystical and metaphysical tradition on Earth, there is a consistent intuition. The material world is not the only realm at play, and our human experience is shaped by forces that operate from beyond the edges of our perception. Modern cosmology maps galaxies, black holes, and multiverses, but even the most advanced physics cannot quite explain consciousness. Mystical systems, in their own language, have always proposed that there is structure in the unseen, that intelligence is not a property exclusive to flesh and blood, but woven into the very scaffolding of the cosmos, and that this intelligence is organized. From the earliest esoteric texts, we hear whispers of these structures, of emanations, spheres, layers of light and shadow, ladders of ascent and descent. These are not metaphors. They are attempts to describe the architecture of being itself. The Gnostic texts, long buried in the sands of Egypt and hidden from mainstream theological discourse, tell of a spiritual world fractured by error. In these teachings, the material universe was not the handiwork of a benevolent creator, but the result of a disruption, a rupture in the divine order. From this rupture emerged the archons, entities who manage the material realm, not out of malice, but out of limitation. They are described as blind administrators, jealous of human potential, enforcing systems of illusion to prevent souls from remembering their origin. To the Gnostic, the world is not evil in essence, but under the governance of flawed gatekeepers, cosmic bureaucrats who mistake control for divinity. These ideas were not just rebellion against institutional religion. They were mystical insights drawn from deep inner experience. The Gnostic initiate did not simply believe in the archons. They encountered their influence in the layers of fear, ego, and false identity that wrapped around the soul like veils. To name them was not superstition. It was a practice of liberation. Centuries later, a vastly different but strangely resonant vision appeared in the enigmatic pages of the Urantia book. Unlike the terse and poetic fragments of the Gnostics, Urantia offers a structured, almost bureaucratic account of cosmic order. It details an intricate universe administration, where galaxies are organized into super-universes governed by paradise suns, infinite spirits, and myriad classifications of beings who carry out the will of a central, unnameable source. On the surface, the two systems, Gnostic and Urantian, appear opposed. One sees the cosmos as corrupted, the other as beautifully ordered. But both agree on something essential. Humanity is not alone, and the forces influencing our lives are neither random nor entirely visible. In Urantia's cosmology, Earth, referred to as Urantia, is one of many inhabited worlds, each overseen by celestial stewards. Among them are beings known as thought adjusters, silent fragments of the divine that dwell within the minds of human beings, guiding them toward growth, truth, and union with the source. These adjusters do not control, they accompany. Their influence is subtle, often unnoticed, yet ever-present. They are not saviors, but seeds implanted in consciousness, waiting for recognition. And just as the Gnostics spoke of archons imposing illusion from above, Urantia speaks of rebellions among the celestial orders. Luciferian uprisings, spiritual quarantine, planetary administrators gone rogue. The spiritual drama is not confined to Earth. It unfolds across dimensions and eons, a theater of evolution, where beings of unimaginable wisdom and those of fractured will intersect and act through the medium of time and mind. The language may differ. The frameworks may conflict. But the essence remains. There are intelligences beyond our own, layered and varied, some luminous, some confused, many unknown. We are participants in a field of consciousness so vast it cannot be seen directly. We are watched, accompanied, challenged, sometimes deceived, sometimes uplifted, not by fantasy, but by structure. This is not about belief. This is about learning to see with a new eye, an eye that recognizes the patterns beneath events, the tone behind thought, the shadow that sometimes rides behind desire. The ancient Greeks understood this well. Their concept of the daimon, neither angel nor demon, but intermediary, reflected a world where the self was never truly isolated. The daimon was the voice that called the artist to her brush, the philosopher to his questions, the hero to his destiny. It did not force. It beckoned. It mirrored. It made inner truth visible. Modern psychology, at its deepest edges, circles back to this. Carl Jung's idea of the self as a greater totality beyond the ego, his concept of archetypes as living patterns, his encounters with Philemon, an inner figure of immense wisdom. These are not mere mental constructs. They are re-emergences of the daimonic, of the inner other that is not separate, but more. When we ignore these inner companions, we feel hollow. When we listen, when we begin to converse, to question, to invite, something opens. Not always with clarity, not always with comfort, but always with presence. And this brings us to a crucial reflection. Who are you speaking with when you talk to yourself in silence? Who is listening when you pray, or despair, or call out in the dark without words? What is it in you that answers? You may call it God, or a higher self, or adjuster, or guardian, or guide. You may not call anything at all, but has always been there, watching, waiting, speaking in the language of intuition, synchronicity, emotion, and pattern. Perhaps the invisible hierarchy is not a ladder, but a network. Not a top-down command chain, but a living ecology of intelligences, some vast, some small, some subtle, some blunt. Perhaps you are not at the bottom of this structure, but at the center of your own branch of it. Not a victim, not a puppet, but a participant. The question is not whether these beings exist. The question is, how are you relating to them? How conscious is your engagement with the unseen collaborators in your life? How much of what you call choice is actually dialogue? And what would change if you started listening more carefully? You are not alone. Not in your thoughts, not in your dreams, not in your struggles. You are part of a larger conversation, one that began before you were born and will continue long after your name is forgotten. You have always had interlocutors. The only question is whether you will answer. There is a kind of humility required to live in the awareness of invisible governance, not the fear-based humility instilled by hierarchical religions, but a spacious humility, an acknowledgement that the forces shaping our lives extend far beyond the limited intellect we use to navigate daily existence. This humility opens the door not to submission, but to participation. It allows us to enter into sacred dialogue with the cosmos as something alive, intelligent, and responsive. The ancient mind did not separate heaven from earth the way we do now. What modern systems of knowledge divide, science, spirit, psyche, cosmos, were once a single language, spoken in gestures, dreams, and ritual. What we now treat as separate disciplines were once facets of a holistic metaphysical grammar that placed the human being not as a detached observer, but as a co-creator and co-listener in the divine drama of existence. To think in terms of cosmic governance today requires not only a shift in vocabulary, but a shift in perception. The mind shaped by linear logic and academic skepticism will resist it. It wants categories, proof, and closure. But the mystic sees structure not in hard lines, but in patterns, recurrences, correspondences, layers of meaning that resonate across time, cultures, and states of consciousness. The mystic does not claim to know the full shape of the architecture. She only knows how to bow when it moves through her. Across traditions, these unseen hierarchies take different names and forms, but their fingerprints converge. The Kabbalistic tree of life, with its Sephirot and angelic realms, mirrors the celestial spheres of Neoplatonism, the heavenly hosts of Christian mysticism, the Devas and Lokas of Hindu cosmology. All speak of a universe not as chaos, but as symphony, a complex, living system of beings, energies, and laws unfolding with purpose. Whether one calls them archons or administrators, daimones or thought adjusters, the core insight remains. Consciousness is layered, and human awareness is only a narrow band of reception within a much broader, more intricate broadcast. The Gnostic warns that some frequencies distort, that not all who speak from the invisible realms are wise, and not all impulses from beyond are benevolent. The Urantia revelation suggests the same, telling of celestial rebellions, of beings of immense power who have chosen fragmentation over unity. There are those in the invisible spectrum who wish to uplift, and those who wish to dominate, mislead, confuse. This is not mythology, it is spiritual discernment. And that discernment begins within. Because just as the cosmos has its orders and its actors, so too does the self. Not a singular self, but a multiplicity. The voices inside you are not always your own. Some are the echoes of your conditioning. Some are ancestral patterns playing themselves out again and again. Some are the residual voices of culture, media, trauma. But others, quieter, subtler, patient, may not originate from your psychology at all. They may be transmissions from your deeper architecture, or from intelligences that accompany you between lives, whispering through symbols, dreams, and silence. To learn to distinguish them is not a quick process. It is the work of a lifetime. It requires sitting still enough, long enough, to begin to feel the differences in texture, rhythm, and intent between the voices within. It requires noticing the emotional signature that each presence carries. The ones that rush, flatter, or inflame usually serve ego. The ones that challenge, quiet, or sharpen usually serve truth. The most important realization, perhaps, is that these forces, whatever names you choose to give them, do not control you. You're not a pawn. You're not a puppet. You are not here to be tested like a lab rat by higher intelligences. You are a node of consciousness in a living network of relationship. You are an emanation of source, embodied in matter, surrounded by both visible and invisible allies and challenges. Your choices matter. Your attention matters. Your willingness to engage the mystery directly, rather than outsource your experience to institutions or systems, is what shapes the quality of your contact. And contact is the point. This life is not an exam. It is a conversation, a multi-layered, multidimensional conversation between your soul, the world, and the wider field of intelligences that form the ecology of being. You are not alone, not ever, not even in your silence, not even in your doubt, especially not in your longing. The question then becomes not, who is out there, but who is with me now, and how am I responding? Not which belief system is true, but what relationship am I cultivating with the invisible? Not do I deserve guidance, but am I listening when it comes? You do not need a perfect understanding of hierarchies to be guided. You only need presence, attention, discernment, reverence. These are your tools. These are the currencies of the sacred. The beings that surround us, whether we call them archons, angels, daimones, or sons of paradise, do not require worship. They require coherence. The more coherent your intention, your vibration, your ethical clarity, the more precise your contact becomes. And in that contact, everything changes. Reality thickens. Synchronicities sharpen. Dreams intensify. Choices become doorways. The ordinary reveals its shimmering edge. You begin to walk not above the world, but more deeply within it, connected, aware, responsive. So ask yourself now, not with fear, but with wonder, who walks with you? Who has walked with you since childhood, whispering through dreams and symbols, nudging you toward paths that felt too impossible to follow at the time? Who are your invisible interlocutors? You may never know their full names, but you can know their presence. You can feel their gravity. You can learn their language, not through words, but through vibration, attention, and the slow, sacred work of remembering how to listen. There are moments in life that seem to break through the static. Moments that arrive without fanfare, suddenly, inexplicably, and for a brief second, everything is clear. The noise disappears. The mind stops grasping. The body relaxes into something beyond understanding. And within that stillness, something speaks, not in words, not in logic, but in a presence so precise, so unmistakably intelligent, that it leaves an imprint long after the moment has passed. We often dismiss these flashes as imagination, as intuition, as coincidence. But what if they're glimpses of something much older, much deeper? What if they're not anomalies, but invitations? According to the Urantia book, each of us carries within us a fragment of the divine, not metaphorically, but literally. This fragment is referred to as the thought adjuster, a silent, indwelling presence that acts as guide, witness, transformer. It is not simply a higher part of the self, nor an external entity. It is a direct expression of the infinite, voluntarily embedded in human consciousness for the purpose of spiritual growth and alignment. And yet, it remains unnoticed by most, precisely because it does not shout. It waits. It whispers. It nudges through conscience, beauty, resonance, and longing. Unlike many theological constructs of divine guidance, the thought adjuster is not reactive. It does not punish or reward. It is patient, unchanging, always oriented toward truth. Its method is not control, but accompaniment. It offers alignment, not from fear or obligation, but from a place beyond duality altogether. It does not impose a path. It helps illuminate the one most aligned with your soul's unfolding. This idea is not unique to Urantia. In fact, it finds echoes across time and culture, like a single tone resonating through many different instruments. Plato speaks of Socrates as having a daimon, a spiritual companion who did not tell him what to do, but intervened when he was about to stray from his path. This daimon did not advise in specifics. It operated as a presence of restraint, a protective force that seemed to know more than the conscious mind. Socrates claimed to never act against it. And perhaps this, more than any argument he ever made, is what gave his philosophy its strange gravitational pull. He was in dialogue with something sacred inside himself. Christian mysticism speaks of the holy guardian angel, a being uniquely assigned to each soul, not a generic protector, but a luminous intelligence attuned specifically to your soul's blueprint. This angel is not bound by the hierarchies of religion, but by love, by resonance, by a commitment to guide without coercion. The Christian mystics, especially in apophatic traditions, often describe this presence as both immanent and unreachable. It is felt more in silence than in speech, more in yearning than in clarity. Its guidance is subtle, but unmistakable once you begin to recognize its frequency. In the Vedic tradition, the Atman is described not as a separate being, but as the self beyond self, the indwelling essence that is not subject to birth or death. It is the spark of Brahman, the absolute, resting silently within the individual. To realize the Atman is not to learn something new, but to unlearn everything that is not truth. The sages speak of the Atman not as something to be attained, but remembered. It was always there. The only obstacle is forgetfulness. Esoteric traditions, especially those arising in the modern era, often speak of the higher self, a more evolved, more luminous version of ourselves that exists in a higher dimension of consciousness. The language varies, but the pattern holds. This being is both you and more than you. It sees beyond time. It knows the lessons your soul came here to explore. It cannot be manipulated. It can only be invited. And it speaks in signs, symbols, dreams, and synchronicities, gently guiding the personality toward integration with its greater identity. These threads weave together into a single tapestry. The awareness that something within us, something just beneath or above or behind the mind, is speaking. Not always clearly, not always in the form we expect, but always with love, always with precision, and always with the intention to awaken us to who and what we really are. Learning to hear this voice is not about mastering technique. It is about attunement, presence, stillness. It is about cleaning the mirror of perception so that the subtle can be felt. It is about trust, not blind faith, but the kind of trust that grows through repeated recognition. You start to notice that certain thoughts come from a place that feels deeper, more centered, more whole. You start to distinguish between the chatter of the mind and the calm clarity of the adjuster, the daimon, the atman, the self. There are no shortcuts to this recognition. It cannot be faked, but can be cultivated. To cultivate this inner relationship is not to adopt a new belief system. It is to enter a new mode of perception. The true voice within does not arrive with trumpets or commandments. It arrives in the pause between thoughts, in the stillness after surrender, in a recognition that something deep inside already knows what you have not yet been able to say aloud. And the more you listen, the more you begin to realize that this voice has always been there, not silent, but speaking in a frequency too subtle for a distracted mind to detect. The world will rarely validate this experience. It will ask for proof, evidence, consensus. But the voice within is not interested in being proven. It is interested in being honored. Its validation is not external. It is internal, revealed through coherence, clarity, and the slow but unmistakable unfolding of synchronicity. You will notice, over time, that listening to this voice does not always make life easier, but it always makes it more real. It may ask you to walk away from comfort, from false security, from relationships or roles that no longer resonate. It may lead you toward uncertainty, but it will also begin to fill your life with a strange and sacred alignment, where what you feel, what you know, and what you do begin to vibrate in harmony. The thought adjuster in Urantia, the daimon of Socrates, the guardian angel of the mystics, the atman of the sages, and the higher self of the esoteric schools are not competing metaphors. They are facets of the same mystery. That within you dwells a source of knowing that transcends both instinct and intellect, and that your life is not a solitary monologue but a dialogue between the self that was shaped by this world and the self that remembers its origin beyond it. You don't need to decode this with theological precision. You don't need to label it. All you need to do is begin to listen, not with your ears, but with the part of you that pays attention beneath words. The part of you that pauses before a choice, not to analyze it, but to feel its texture. The part of you that knows when something is true, not because it makes sense, but because it makes you still. If you are ready, you can begin now. Not tomorrow, not after more study, not after mastering some spiritual system. Now, let yourself sit in silence. No expectations, no rituals, just you and the breath. Notice the way thoughts arise and pass. Notice the temptation to control them. Let that go. Sink deeper. Beneath the noise, beneath the effort, there is a presence. You may not be able to name it, but you can feel it. Like warmth without a source. Like gravity that pulls not downward but inward. Stay there and ask, softly, sincerely, not as a demand but as an invitation. Are you there? Then wait. Don't rush the answer. It may not come in words. It may come in memory, in image, in sensation. It may come as silence that feels full instead of empty. Trust that whatever rises is part of the conversation. This is not about hearing voices. It is about recognizing resonance. It is about learning to live in companionship with the most ancient part of yourself, the part that is not afraid, not broken, not striving, the part that already knows the way home. In time, you may begin to sense this presence in more moments, in decisions, in dreams, in the sudden clarity that cuts through confusion, in the gentle warning before a misstep, in the joy that arrives for no reason at all. You may even begin to speak with it, not in ritual, but in intimacy, not to extract answers, but to deepen connection. And when you do, you will know. You're not alone. You were never alone. You were simply waiting to remember how to listen. We have been taught to look at the stars as if they are decoration. Distant suns, cold geometry, astrophysical phenomena. Beautiful, but fundamentally indifferent to us. Yet for most of human history, this was not how the night sky was experienced. The heavens were not a passive backdrop. They were a conversation, a sacred theater, a living map of intelligences, forces, and archetypes in motion. The stars were not just balls of gas. They were signs, beings, teachers, presences. The cosmos was alive, layered, and sentient. Even now, something in us remembers this. We look up and feel awe, reverence, a kind of homesickness for something we've never touched but know instinctively to be real. This feeling is not just emotion. It is perception trying to break through the veil of conditioning. A glimpse of the deeper cosmology our ancestors knew, not as theory, but as relationship. To begin to think cosmologically is to accept that reality is not flat. It is not made of one dimension or one level of consciousness. It is layered, nested, interpenetrating. We live not in a universe, but in a multiverse of energy, form, intelligence, and will, an ecosystem of dimensions that extend both outward into the vastness and inward into the depth of self. Most of these layers are invisible to the physical senses, but not to the inner eye. They are not afterlife realms as often portrayed, but concurrent realities vibrating at frequencies just beyond ordinary perception. The Gnostic tradition called this structure the pleroma, the fullness. In contrast to the material world, which they saw as fragmented and unstable, the pleroma was the realm of pure order, light, and unity. It was not a place in space, but a state of reality where all things returned to their original harmony. From the pleroma emanated countless eons, archetypal forces or beings, often in male-female pairs, each representing an aspect of divine mind. These eons were not worshipped as gods, but understood as currents of intelligence, the building blocks of creation itself. For the Gnostics, the visible world was a shadow cast by a distorted lens, creation fallen into forgetfulness. But the path of return was not escape. It was gnosis, inner knowing, the realization that behind the illusion of separation, the soul was always connected to the source. The cosmos, in this view, was not a prison, but a riddle. And the solution was awakening. In a very different register, the Urantia book offers its own vast cosmological vision, but not as a mythic narrative. It reads like a transmission from a civilization of celestial administrators. It outlines a cosmic bureaucracy where galaxies and universes are structured in ascending orders of intelligence and administration. At the heart of this structure is paradise, the center of all creation, surrounded by 7 super-universes, each overseen by a coordinating master spirit, one of 7 primal expressions of the infinite. These 7 master spirits are not characters, but cosmic intelligences, massive, coherent fields of divine personality that govern entire sectors of reality. Each is associated with a different aspect of deity: will, wisdom, love, justice, and so on. Through their emanation, local universes are born, ruled by creator sons, and organized by orders of celestial beings whose diversity and complexity are staggering. Unlike the hierarchical images we are used to, pyramids of power and submission, Urantia's cosmology speaks of administration through alignment. Each being, from the smallest to the most exalted, exists in a system of purpose, service, and evolution. It is not mechanical, it is organic. The universe, in this vision, is not a machine, but a living organism whose intelligence expresses itself through relational order. And within this living system, the human soul is not insignificant. It is a microcosm, a carrier of potential capable of fusing with the divine. This idea is not as foreign as it sounds. In Neoplatonic theurgy, the ancient philosophers also saw the cosmos as a hierarchy of spheres, each inhabited by intelligences that emanated from the One, the source beyond form. The purpose of the theurgic path was not worship in the conventional sense, but participation. The initiate performed sacred acts, used symbols, and entered states of contemplation not to manipulate reality, but to become attuned to its deeper structure. The goal was henosis, union with the divine, not through dogma, but through resonance. Theurgy taught that the soul descends into embodiment through various levels, each more dense than the last, and that true spiritual work is not about rejecting matter, but reintegrating the soul's original memory of the higher realms. This reintegration is accomplished not through belief, but through ritual, insight, and an ethical alignment with truth. The stars were not distant. They were the outer signs of inner realities. To know them was to know yourself. Sufism, though born in a different tradition, sings the same song in a different key. Here, the cosmos is not a hierarchy of form, but a dance of love. The path is not ascent through levels, but a spiral of longing. The stations of the soul, as described by early Sufis, are not intellectual concepts. They are emotional, existential thresholds through which the seeker passes, shedding layers of illusion. Each station brings the soul closer to annihilation of ego and union with the beloved. This is not metaphor. The Sufi does not speak of God as abstraction, but as presence, flame, intoxication. The world is not illusion to be escaped, but a veil to be pierced. Every layer of reality, every emotion, every encounter, every silence is a mirror reflecting back the state of your alignment. The cosmos in Sufism is alive because it is the body of the divine. And the way to read it is not through doctrine, but through love. Across all these systems, Gnostic, Urantian, Neoplatonic, Sufi, we encounter a radical idea that reality is structured and that this structure is conscious, that the soul is not lost in a meaningless void, but placed within a living web of intelligence designed to foster awakening, and that each moment of silence, each intuition, each pull toward the unseen is not hallucination, it is invitation. The moment one begins to consider the universe as alive, structured, and meaningfully interconnected, something begins to shift in the soul. The casual indifference of modern cosmology, the cold, statistical view of space as dead matter and blind force, starts to fall away, and a different quality of presence begins to rise. This presence is not external. It is not found in textbooks or diagrams. It is intimate, resonant, and strangely familiar. The universe, seen through the lens of these spiritual cosmologies, becomes not a thing to be measured, but a presence to be met. This meeting is not always comfortable. When one begins to perceive that every event, every emotion, every apparent coincidence might be woven into a much larger tapestry, the illusion of randomness begins to collapse. With that collapse comes both liberation and responsibility. If life is meaningful at every level, then your attention becomes sacred. Then the way you respond to each moment begins to shape not only your future, but the clarity of your contact with the unseen worlds. What these cosmologies offer is not just belief, but a different mode of being in the world, a sacred orientation in which the invisible is not secondary, but primary. In a Gnostic model, awakening is not about leaving the world, but about perceiving the structures of illusion so clearly that you can move through them without being trapped by them. In Urantia's map, spiritual evolution is the natural response to recognizing your place in a vast cosmic family, where every action, no matter how small, is part of a long trajectory toward fusion with the divine. In Neoplatonism, every soul has descended through the spheres and now seeks its return, not through effort, but through purification and remembrance. In Sufism, each movement of the heart is a signpost on the inward pilgrimage, each longing a spark from the fire of divine separation, seeking reunion. These systems are not contradictory. They are different dialects of the same language, spoken from different altitudes of consciousness, shaped by different landscapes, yet all pointing to a universe that is far more participatory, intelligent, and relational than our fragmented worldview allows us to imagine. When we step into their rhythms, when we begin to see through their eyes, the familiar becomes strange again. And in that strangeness, the sacred begins to glow through the cracks. The beauty of these cosmologies is not in their structure alone, but in the way they awaken a sense of reverence. A reverence not born of fear, but of alignment. You begin to walk more slowly. You listen more closely. You speak more carefully, not because someone is watching, but because everything is listening. You understand that to think is to shape vibration, that to feel is to transmit signal, that to act is to participate in a wider orchestration of meaning. And perhaps the most important thing these teachings agree upon is that the human being is not a spectator in this process. You are not a detached observer looking up at an indifferent sky. You are a thread in the weave. You are both cell and symbol. The same patterns that govern the stars are mirrored in your body, in your psyche, in the spiral of your own becoming. The structure of the cosmos is not only above you, it is within you. There is a reason why sacred architecture, sacred music, and sacred speech all share an obsession with pattern, proportion, rhythm, and resonance. They are not aesthetic flourishes. They are attempts to echo the harmony of the greater design. When we align with these principles, we don't just feel inspired. We remember that we are part of something, that our suffering is not meaningless, that our longing is not madness, that the silence we feel when we pray is not absence. It is vastness waiting for presence. And so the invisible cosmologies begin to press gently on the edges of the visible world, not to convince you, but to invite you. They do not ask for belief. They ask for attention. They ask for a new way of seeing, one in which the structure of the invisible becomes not a theory, but a rhythm you live by. Begin to watch the world as if it were alive, not metaphorically, but actually. Speak aloud to the stars, to the wind, to the spaces between things. Listen for response, not in thunder, but in the small changes of feeling, in the sudden images that rise in the mind, in the way a sentence from a stranger seems to answer a question you never spoke. You are surrounded, not in danger, but in conversation. The cosmos is not waiting for you to decode it. It is waiting for you to remember that it speaks in a language older than logic, deeper than analysis. It speaks in shape, symbol, movement, stillness. And it speaks most clearly when you're quiet enough to hear what has always been speaking. There's a point in every spiritual journey when knowing is no longer enough. Words, concepts, frameworks, no matter how elegant, begin to feel hollow unless they are lived. Understanding must become embodiment. Perception must become participation. The invisible, once contemplated from a distance, begins to ask for intimacy. And that intimacy begins in ritual. Ritual is not superstition. It is not theatricality or dogma. True ritual is the choreography of attention. It is the act of making the invisible visible through the medium of time, space, body, and intention. It is the human being standing in the center of the mystery and choosing to respond, not with ideas, but with presence. To reconnect with the invisible is not to escape the physical. It is to deepen it. The body is not an obstacle on the spiritual path. It is the vessel through which spirit touches form. Every movement, every breath, every vibration carries the potential to become a sacred act. The question is not whether the invisible is present. The question is whether we are attuned enough to feel it. One of the most ancient ways to enter this attunement is through sound. Long before language was systematized, human beings used sound as a bridge between dimensions. The chants of early shamans, the overtoned singing of nomadic tribes, the syllabic invocations of temple priests, all were methods of tuning the body to cosmic frequencies. These were not performances. They were calibrations. Sound is not just heard, it is felt. The right sound, offered with the right intention, can shift consciousness, clear stagnant emotion, and reopen channels of perception long closed by habit or trauma. This is not mystical metaphor. It is physical reality. Every cell responds to vibration. And certain tones, passed down through traditions or remembered spontaneously in states of deep stillness, have the power to reorient the psyche to its original rhythm. You do not need to study ancient music theory to access this. You only need to listen. Allow your own voice to become a tuning fork. Sit in silence. Breathe slowly. Begin to hum, not to produce beauty, but to feel resonance. Let the sound arise from the chest, from the belly, from the back of the throat. Let it change as it needs to. Let it find you. You are not performing. You are remembering. You are vibrating the veil. The sun and the moon, too, are not passive objects. They are living clocks, cosmic mirrors, pulsing with rhythms that have guided ritual for millennia. Before calendars were printed, time was felt through them. Planting, harvesting, mourning, birthing, cleansing, celebrating. All were synchronized with solar and lunar movement. The body, too, feels these tides, though we have long forgotten how to listen. To reconnect with the invisible through solar and lunar ritual is not to imitate old practices, but to rediscover your participation in the rhythm of the cosmos. Watch the sky. Notice the new moon and the full. Notice how your energy shifts. Rise before dawn and face the sun, not to worship, but to absorb, to offer stillness in return for light. Walk barefoot on earth at night, and let the moonlight enter through the crown of your head. These are not symbolic acts. They are transmissions. Just as the cosmos holds structure, your body holds memory. It is a living altar marked by sacred geometry, sensitive to intention, shaped by vibration. It does not need to be purified to become spiritual. It already is. It only needs to be inhabited fully. You cannot reconnect with the invisible by leaving the body. You must enter it more deeply. You must let it speak. And it speaks most clearly when you begin to recognize that you are not one voice, but many. That within you dwell presences, patterns of behavior, emotional tones, intuitive intelligences that are older than your conscious mind. Some of these are inherited. Some are archetypal. Some are ancestral. Some are entirely yours. In ancient Greece, they were called daimones, not demons as later mistranslated, but intermediary spirits, facets of the soul that bridge the personal and the cosmic. To work with these internal daimones is not to suppress or exorcise them, but to meet them with honesty. What energies move through you when you are angry, inspired, afraid, elated? What names do these energies carry? What colors? What postures? Begin to observe. Begin to differentiate. Begin a dialogue. You are not one. You are a constellation. And ritual is how you call the stars into alignment. If the daimones within you represent forces to be recognized, integrated, and harmonized, then the thought adjuster is the silent center around which they orbit. Not a force among others, but the axis. Not a voice, but the stillness in which all voices arise. You cannot conjure the adjuster. You can only allow it. Its presence is not summoned. It is uncovered. It does not speak in language. It speaks in alignment. To contact this indwelling presence is not to hear words, but to fall inward. There is no ritual for this in the conventional sense. Only space, only silence, only surrender. You begin by softening, by relinquishing the need to direct the experience. You set aside ambition, expectation, even the desire to succeed. You sit not to reach the divine, but to stop resisting it. And in that stopping, something opens. This is not meditation in the common sense of calming the mind. It is deeper. It is listening without demand, feeling without agenda, being without armor. The adjuster is not reactive. It does not operate according to your timetable. It waits, perfectly patient, until your frequency becomes quiet enough to resonate with its signal. When that happens, there is no flash of light. There is no dramatic revelation. There is only a shift, a depth, a peace that feels ancient, a knowing that arrives wordlessly and rearranges you from the inside out. Over time, this contact becomes a rhythm, a subtle gravity. You begin to notice which thoughts flow from that space and which do not. You begin to feel when you are aligned and when you have drifted. And slowly, very slowly, your life begins to orbit this center. Not perfectly, not without detours, but more and more you return. Not because you were told to, but because you want to, because no other voice feels as whole. This reconnection does not require renunciation. It does not ask you to leave the world. It asks you to be fully in it, but in resonance. And for that, the body is not a hindrance. The body is the gate. The great traditions have always known this. The mystics danced. The monks bowed. The shamans trembled and sang. The body is not spiritual by accident. It is spiritual by design. Every gesture, every breath, every sensation is a potential sacrament if offered with presence. We live in a time that encourages dissociation, cutting the mind from the body, the spirit from the flesh. But nothing can be reached that way. You do not find the sacred by floating above. You find it by descending more deeply into the exact place where you are with full attention. That is where the veil begins to lift. Feel your feet on the ground. Feel the breath move through you. Feel the tension in your shoulders, the weight of your jaw, the rhythm of your pulse. These are not distractions. These are doorways. The body does not need to be transcended. It needs to be honored. It holds your memories, your intuitions, your ancestral codes. It holds your grief and your joy, your visions and your forgetting. And it holds, above all, the capacity to anchor the invisible into the visible world. This is the function of ritual, not to escape reality, but to deepen it. Not to summon forces, but to remember that they are already here. The sounds you make, the gestures you trace, the moments you mark in rhythm with the moon or the sun or your own breath, they are all ways of aligning what is seen with what is unseen. And when alignment occurs, even briefly, something shifts in the world around you. The fabric of the moment becomes more permeable. The wind answers differently. The silence becomes filled. And you remember, again and again, that you are never alone. You're not a seeker reaching towards something distant. You are a presence rediscovering what was always near. The veil was never external. The distance was never real. The path, the voice, the contact, it all begins and ends in the stillness of your own embodied attention. There is a kind of event that defies logic, not because it breaks the laws of nature, but because it feels too precise to be chance. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and they call you. You dream of a symbol, and then see it etched on a stranger's jacket the next day. A book falls from a shelf, opening to the exact passage that answers a question you didn't even know how to ask. These are not hallucinations. They are messages, not in the way superstition would have you believe, but in the way the universe speaks when it wants to be heard. Carl Jung called these events synchronicities, meaningful coincidences with no apparent causal connection, yet charged with personal significance. He understood that not all causality moves in straight lines. Some of it spirals. Some of it radiates inward. Some of it operates from a deeper field of intelligence where mind and matter are not separate, but facets of a single reality woven together by meaning. To live in awareness of synchronicity is to shift from a mechanical to a symbolic worldview. It is to see life not as a series of disconnected events, but as a dynamic, living dialogue between your inner state and the outer world. This dialogue is not predictable. It cannot be controlled, but it can be recognized. And once recognized, it becomes a path. Synchronicity is not just a philosophical concept. It is a practice of attention. It asks that you slow down, that you notice what you would usually dismiss, that you begin to feel the texture of time, not as a linear progression, but as a field of potential revelation. A glance from a stranger, a line in a song, the sequence of numbers on a receipt. Anything can become the medium for meaning when your consciousness is tuned to depth. The Urantia book, though vastly different in tone and purpose, also speaks of patterns behind the apparent randomness of life. It proposes that human experience is embedded within a system of divine administration so complex that what we call chance is often the result of unseen coordination. The thought adjuster, it suggests, does not intervene in ways that override free will, but does subtly influence the trajectory of experience to allow for greater spiritual growth. These interventions are rarely dramatic. They appear as small shifts, odd timings, inner promptings that lead you toward events that seem designed to awaken something dormant in you. In both Jung's vision and Urantia's cosmology, we find the same core idea, that the universe is not indifferent. It is interactive, it responds, it participates, and it does so not through spectacle, but through the mysterious weaving of meaning into the fabric of the mundane. To begin tracking synchronicity in your life is to train yourself to see symbolically. This is not about magical thinking. It is not about interpreting every broken glass or red light as a cosmic message. It is about learning to feel the difference between noise and signal. When a coincidence arrives with emotional charge, with resonance, with the feeling that something just opened beneath the surface of things, that is when the invisible is speaking. One of the simplest and most profound ways to engage with this is to keep a synchronicity journal, not a diary of events, but a record of moments that carry that strange, electric feeling of meaningful coincidence. It doesn't matter if you understand them. What matters is that you recognize them. You begin by writing down the dream you had, the song that followed it, the conversation that unexpectedly echoed both. Over time, patterns emerge. Symbols repeat. Themes return with increasing clarity. You're not decoding a static code. You're entering into a relationship. Your journal becomes a mirror. It shows you not just what is happening, but how you are evolving in your perception of what is happening. It becomes a sacred text written not by you alone, but by the interplay of your awareness with the field of being itself. Eventually, you may find that this perception wants to become more interactive, that you want to speak back to the universe, not just listen. And you can, not through elaborate rituals, but through simple invitations. You can create your own oracles, tools that open a space for dialogue with the invisible. You do not need divination systems passed down through tradition, though those have their place. You can begin with objects already close to you, a collection of stones, each chosen intuitively, a set of symbols drawn by hand, cards made from old book pages, each one a window. What matters is not the object itself, but the relationship you build with it. If used with reverence, with sincerity, with openness, even the most mundane items can become vessels for subtle conversation. This is not superstition. This is intimacy with the invisible. This is learning to trust that meaning wants to meet you, that the world is not closed, and that your longing to understand is itself the beginning of an answer. To live in dialogue with synchronicity is not to live in fantasy, but to deepen your fidelity to what is real. The more you attend to these moments of charged coincidence, the more you begin to realize that the world itself behaves like a dream. Not because it is false, but because it speaks in layers, symbols, loops, and echoes. It has narrative. It has timing. It has a voice. What would it mean to treat your month not as a calendar of tasks, but as an unfolding oracle? What if the very structure of your experience, its repetitions, anomalies, symbols, and meetings, was already a sacred text being written with and through you? You don't need to understand all of it. You only need to track it. This is not about interpreting every detail. It is about learning to feel where the pattern thickens, where the fabric of time becomes more porous, where a certain day or image or conversation carries more weight than its appearance suggests. You begin simply. Choose a stretch of time, 4 weeks, a lunar cycle, a season. Set the intention not to analyze, but to observe. Each day, note what arises, what you dreamed, what stood out, what felt strange or unusually alive. Don't worry if it feels trivial. You are not collecting meaning. You are cultivating relationship. You are showing the invisible that you're listening. As you write, you may begin to notice that certain themes recur, not randomly, but rhythmically. A bird appears again and again. A particular number, a forgotten song returns in unexpected places. A phrase repeats across conversations with people who don't know each other. These are the signatures of the field communicating with you, not in abstractions, but in the language of experience. The point is not to extract prophecy. It is to co-create coherence. By mapping your month in this way, you begin to track the deeper weather systems of your soul's atmosphere. You begin to see how your internal state magnetizes certain external reflections. You begin to notice which days felt oracular and which did not, and what was different about your quality of attention on those days. This kind of mapping transforms the way you relate to the flow of life. It teaches you to wait, not passively, but receptively, to see timing not as delay, but as intelligence, to treat the unfolding of events not as linear necessity, but as invitation to presence. Even difficulty begins to speak differently. Obstacles are no longer just hindrances. They are punctuation marks, thresholds, mirror surfaces. They ask not just for resolution, but for recognition. Some will tell you that this way of living is impractical, too mystical, too subjective. But perhaps what they are really saying is that they are afraid to live in a world that listens back. Because if the world listens, if the world speaks, then everything changes. Then your emotions matter. Then your questions matter. Then every thought becomes a signal, every act a prayer, every moment a potential turning point in a story larger than you can fully see. Synchronicity does not require belief. It only requires attention. The oracular world is not something you access with special gifts. It is something you remember slowly as you clear away the noise of distraction and begin to live as if the moment you are in is alive with unseen presence. That is what ritual taught you. That is what the adjuster whispers. That is what the dreams have been trying to show you. And that is what the world will keep reflecting until you can no longer ignore that the real oracle is not a system or a book or a person. The real oracle is time itself, the moment, the way the invisible becomes visible just enough for you to notice, the pattern that speaks only when you are quiet enough to listen, the life that answers the questions you never said aloud. There comes a moment on every sincere path when the light that once guided you disappears. The signs cease. The dreams lose their clarity. The rituals feel empty. The synchronicities stop speaking. What once felt like a luminous companionship with the universe collapses into silence, and you are left standing in a vast interior space with no map, no voice, and no assurance that any of it was ever real. This is not failure. This is the threshold. This is the beginning of the night. The dark night of the soul is not the same as despair, though it may resemble it. It is not psychological depression, though it may mimic its symptoms. It is a spiritual event, a stripping away, a dismantling of images, certainties, identifications, and even joy, not to punish, but to hollow out space for something truer, something deeper, something that does not need to be seen to be real. In the early stages of spiritual awakening, everything feels alive. There are signs, confirmations, teachings that arrive exactly when needed. You feel supported, guided, chosen. But this brightness is only the beginning. It is the invitation. It is the spark that awakens desire. And desire, once awakened, is tested, not cruelly, but initiatically, because what follows is not more light, but more fire. And fire does not decorate. Fire refines. The soul cannot evolve by addition alone. It must also be emptied. And the emptiness, when it arrives, feels like death. It is not dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, slow. You begin to wonder if you've done something wrong, if the magic has run out, if the invisible world has withdrawn. And in a way it has, but not out of anger, out of necessity. The hierarchies of the invisible, those felt presences that once whispered and held and confirmed your steps, grow quiet. The inner voice becomes a murmur or disappears altogether. The warmth that accompanied your prayer is replaced by an arid neutrality. This is not abandonment. This is space. This is the soul's chance to stand without crutches, without signs, without reassurances, to see if what it seeks is real enough to survive without reward. Ancient texts knew this space intimately. The mystics did not romanticize it. They described it in stark, terrifying terms: deserts without end, nights without stars, trials that unravel the self. St. John of the Cross wrote of the soul walking blind through a dark night, kindled only by the fire of love. Teresa of Avila spoke of the long dryness, where not even tears would come. In Eastern traditions, this same stage appears in different symbols: the dissolution of the lower self, the emptiness before Satori, the burning ground of yogic initiation. In each case, the pattern holds. Silence precedes transformation, but it is a specific kind of silence, not absence, not punishment. It is more like the silence of a teacher who has stopped giving answers so the student can discover their own. The universe, which once spoke to you in dreams and signs, now speaks only in the echo of your own footsteps. And even that begins to fade. All that is left is endurance. Not the endurance of effort, but of presence, of continuing to show up when nothing is given in return. This is the moment where many turn back. They return to distraction, to old identities, to louder gods who promise certainty. And that too is a path. But if you stay, if you remain in the void without demanding that it resolve itself, you begin to hear something different. Not a voice, not a message, a pulse, a quiet rhythm beneath the silence, a subtle coherence that needs no interpretation. You begin to learn the language of absence. And in that absence, you are shown what you really worship. Not what you say you believe, but what you cannot live without. The dark night strips away the comfort of image, the sweetness of reward, the illusion of control. What remains is raw, vulnerable, unadorned, but is real. And realness is the only thing that can receive the deeper fire. There is no formula for moving through the dark night. No checklist, no guaranteed outcome. It is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be endured, and in that endurance, something ancient begins to awaken. Not a new version of self, but a deeper current of being that was never touched by belief, mood, or even memory. The soul does not evolve by what it gains. It evolves by what it survives. You begin to understand that this darkness is not empty. It is fertile. That what feels like death is not an end, but a depth. It is not punishment. It is gestation. The light that once comforted you was borrowed. This silence demands that you become the flame yourself. And yet there is pain, a kind of aching that doesn't cry loudly but sinks like a weight in the chest. The temptation is to name it depression, to medicate, to escape. But the spiritual night is not pathology. It mimics depression, but its intention is different. Where depression collapses, the night carves. Where depression numbs, the night sensitizes. What you feel is not failure. It is initiation. You're being reoriented from the outside in. But because modern culture has no rights for this passage, we mistake the process for personal breakdown. We pathologize a sacred disintegration. We rush to fix what needs to fall apart. And so the soul, already stripped bare, is shamed for its silence. That shame is the true darkness, not the absence of light, but the loss of trust in our own becoming. And so we must speak differently to ourselves here. We must develop a new kind of inner speech, not the language of striving, but of presence, not encouragement, but witnessing. You do not need to be told it will pass. You need someone to sit with you in the not knowing. That someone, first and foremost, must be you. Imagine the dark night not as a failure of light, but as the place where light is remade. The stars do not vanish when the sun rises. They simply become invisible in the presence of a greater illumination. And so it is with you. Your connection has not been severed. It has been buried beneath a deeper invitation. This is where ancient texts become lifelines, not because they offer escape, but because they offer recognition. They name what you're going through in ways your modern vocabulary cannot. They speak of the soul as wanderer, as initiate, as seeds sleeping in the soil of mystery. And they remind you that every descent is part of a pattern, that you're not lost, you are beneath. If you were to create a ritual for this passage, it would not be elaborate. It would not require tools, temples, or teachers. It would ask only for honesty, for time, for space, for the willingness to feel what is here without needing to resolve it. Your ritual might be as simple as lighting a single candle each night and watching it burn. Not for guidance, not for answers, just to remember that even the smallest flame refuses to be swallowed by the dark. You might write one word each day, one word that names your state, not as a label, but as a thread, Over time, these words will begin to draw a map. Not a straight line out of the night, but a spiral inward. A constellation of moments that reveal how deeply you have been changed, not by knowing more, but by needing less. The silence of the invisible is not abandonment. It is maturation. It is the moment when the soul must walk without being carried, must choose the path without external signposts, must become its own source of warmth. And in that silence, if you remain long enough, the threshold appears, not as a revelation, but as a softness, as a day when the weight lifts slightly and the breath feels different, as a moment when you realize you are not asking the same questions anymore, as the quiet return of a kind of joy that is not reactive, not ecstatic, but cellular, subtle, durable, a joy that does not deny the dark, but grows from it like a root through stone. This is how you know the night is ending, not with angels, not with certainty, but with the gentle surprise of your own resilience. You are still here, and in the stillness, something has shifted. Not everything must be seen to be true. Not everything must be known to be trusted. And not every silence is empty. Some silences are full of stars. The most delicate part of the journey is not the awakening. It is the return. The moment when the soul, swollen with new vision, re-enters the world of errands, responsibilities, and conversations that don't ask about the stars. You come back changed, but nothing around you seems to notice. The mail still arrives. The dishes still pile up. The world did not pause for your metamorphosis. And so, quietly, you face the real task, not enlightenment, but embodiment. To integrate is not to compromise. It is not to pretend that the invisible was a dream or to translate it into something more acceptable. It is to allow what you touched in silence to shape how you move through noise. Integration is a discipline of presence. It is how the sacred survives the return to the ordinary. It is how you carry the fire without burning yourself or others. Many who awaken to deeper realities are tempted to withdraw, to cocoon themselves in spiritual language, to speak only with those who understand, to distrust the practical world as somehow impure. But isolation is not holiness, and wisdom that cannot sit at the table, pay a bill, or listen to a child's question without superiority is not wisdom. It is escape in disguise. Spirituality must touch the ground. If it cannot hold paradox, if it cannot survive contradiction, if it becomes allergic to the unfinished business of being human, it has not matured. To integrate is to stop fleeing into light every time the shadow appears. It is to know that clarity and confusion often walk hand in hand, that insight is not enough if it does not become compassion. This is where discipline emerges, not as rigidity, but as a gentle structure that protects what is most subtle in you. The deeper you go, the more quietly you must live, not silently, but responsibly. You begin to choose your words more carefully, not to sound holy, but to avoid scattering your energy. You learn when to speak and when to allow silence to do the speaking. You no longer rush to share every insight. You let some truths ripen inside you before offering them to the world. At the same time, you must beware the trap of fanaticism. The ego is clever, and it knows how to wear spiritual clothing. It will convince you that your path is the only path, that your contact with the invisible is superior, that others who doubt you are asleep or low frequency. This is not awakening. It is inflation, and it disconnects you from the humility that is the true mark of depth. True spiritual maturity includes ethics, not as rules imposed from outside, but as an inner alignment, a quiet refusal to manipulate, to impress, to dominate, a commitment to walk in truth even when it is inconvenient. The invisible world does not grant exemptions from human responsibility. If anything, it asks for more care, more honesty, more discernment. The more subtle your vision becomes, the more important it is that your actions remain clear. This includes your relationship with the invisible itself. Just because you can sense something does not mean you must act on it. Not every whisper is wisdom. Not every image is guidance. Not every intuitive hit is free from distortion. The unseen world, like the seen one, requires boundaries. You are not its servant. You are its steward. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to wait before interpreting a dream or chasing a vision. And you are allowed, indeed required, to cultivate discernment. This means learning the difference between intuition and impulse, between sacred silence and avoidance, between true guidance and emotional projection. The true signal often arrives with quiet certainty, without urgency or drama. The false one demands, flatters, or frightens. The work is not to reject all messages, but to feel which ones are rooted in the deeper soil of your being and which are echoes of unmet needs. This level of discernment is not about suspicion. It is about refinement. It is about becoming attuned enough to recognize when something carries the resonance of truth, not because it agrees with you, but because it calls you into greater integrity. Often, the real signal does not soothe you. It humbles you. It asks more of you than you expected to give. And in answering it, you grow. To live with one foot in the invisible and one in the world is not to be split. It is to be whole. It is to allow the mystery to inform your choices without escaping into it. It is to pray while doing the laundry, to bless your food without needing incense, to love without needing to save, to serve without needing to be seen. You are not here to ascend endlessly. You are here to descend consciously, to bring what is luminous into form, to live in such a way that the invisible becomes visible through the tone of your presence, the steadiness of your listening, the quiet integrity of your smallest act. This is integration, not arrival, not mastery, but fidelity to the unseen, to the mundane, to the path that asks you to hold both. There is no final to a path that leads inward. There is no finish line in a spiral. The more you see, the more you realize how much there is you cannot see. The closer you get to what you thought was truth, the more it dissolves into something larger, quieter, and more paradoxically alive. The soul's journey is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be participated in again and again in deeper and subtler ways. You are not here to master the invisible. You are here to walk beside it, to listen when it speaks, to bow when it is silent, to live not with certainty, but with sincerity. This is the great work, not perfection, but participation. And participation means that the questions will remain. It means that your longing will not always be satisfied, but it will always be holy. Teilhard de Chardin once wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." But even that is only half of the mystery. You're not only a spirit in flesh. You're also the bridge between. You are the moment where seen and unseen meet, not in conflict, but in reverence. You are not meant to escape the world. You're meant to transfigure it, not with force, not with brilliance, but with presence, with humility, with a kind of luminous ordinariness that can laugh and rest and bless without effort. There is a deeper intelligence moving through you, and it does not ask to be dramatized. It asks only to be lived. The Urantia book speaks of this elegantly when it describes the soul's journey not as escape from time, but as a voyage through universes toward deeper and deeper alignment with divine will. It suggests that evolution is not a detour, it is the way. That even confusion, even darkness, is held within a larger rhythm of becoming. It reminds us that our smallest acts ripple through eternity, not because we are powerful, but because love is, and love, ultimately, is what remains when all the systems dissolve. Not the emotion, not the desire, not the attachment, but the underlying field, the quiet yes that holds everything. Rumi said it best. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. That field is not far. It is here, just beneath the surface of things. And you don't arrive there by effort. You arrive by softening. So this chapter is not a closure. It is an opening. Not an answer, but an echo. A hand placed gently on your shoulder in the dark, reminding you that you are not lost. You are being led, but not in straight lines. You are being shaped, not by force, but by grace. And grace moves strangely. It arrives through silence, through loss, through the unexpected crack in your certainty, through the one phrase that stays with you long after the rest is forgotten. Perhaps this is that phrase. Perhaps it has not yet been spoken. Perhaps you must write it yourself. What do you do when there is nothing left to prove? When all the insights have been received, the signs have faded, and you are left standing in the ordinary moment, unchanged on the surface, but profoundly different inside. You return. You return not to the beginning, but to the presence. You return to the breath, the step, the look in someone's eyes, the texture of sunlight on your hand. You return to what was always there, now seen through the lens of everything you have lived, burned through, and survived. You begin again. This is not a failure of the path. It is its perfection. The journey was never linear. It loops, spirals, deepens. The mystery does not want to be conquered. It wants to be walked with. And if you listen, it will speak to you in ways that no doctrine can hold. Through a child's laughter, through the rhythm of a broom sweeping the floor, through a sentence in an old book that feels like it was written just for you. Teilhard de Chardin reminds us, the day will come when, after harnessing space, the winds, the tides, and gravitation, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. That fire is already in you. You felt it in the silence, in the dark, in the rituals, in the strange alignments that whispered, you are not alone. Now, that flame becomes your compass, not to lead you away, but to anchor you more deeply in the world you came to serve. Because this was never just about your awakening. It was always about becoming a living bridge between realms, between hearts, between the unspoken and the fully felt. And so we end, as all sacred journeys do, with a return to intimacy. Not with concepts, but with presence. Here is your invitation. Find a quiet space. Close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths. Not to relax, but to return. And when you are ready, begin a dialogue. Not out loud, not in ritual form, but in the inner chamber of your being. Ask the invisible whatever you wish. Speak as if to a friend. Ask what you most need to ask. Not what is clever, but what is true. Then wait. Not for a voice, but for a shift. A wordless knowing. A vibration. A remembering. Write it down if you feel called. Or simply carry it with you into your next moment, your next decision, your next smile. Let the conversation continue at the kitchen sink in a crowded street beneath the moon. Let life itself become the sacred scroll. Let your listening become the temple. And when you doubt again, because you will, return to this place. Not as a retreat, but as a home. The invisible is not out there. It is in you. Not as a theory, but as a pulse, a breath, a flame that asks only this, live. And as you do, remember, the mystery continues, and always will. Let it. Let it. In every age, the light is mirrored by imitation. Wherever there is real fire, there is also the flicker of artificial flame. And in an era like ours, saturated with images, flooded with content, obsessed with immediacy, the risk is no longer that we won't find spiritual voices. The risk is that we'll find too many, and that in the noise, we will forget what silence sounds like. The modern seeker does not walk through deserts to find truth. They scroll. They click. They are met by an endless parade of glowing faces, spiritual slogans, and algorithmic oracles. And while many of these carry genuine heart, many others are not teachers. They are performers. Their light is not steady. It is curated, marketed, packaged to resonate with your desire for clarity, affirmation, or transcendence, but lacking the fire of transformation. This is the age of false lights, the shiny, seductive voices that mimic depth but demand no cost, that use the language of awakening to promote identity, lifestyle, or personal brand, that offer comfort but not confrontation, that soothe the ego while claiming to dismantle it. They are not evil. They are not even conscious of their distortion. That is what makes them dangerous, because the most dangerous illusion is the one that looks almost like truth. And this danger is not only outside of you, it lives in you. The temptation to inflate your mystical experiences, to confuse intuition with superiority, to make your insights into absolutes, to place your personal journey above others. This is the spiritual ego trip, the shadow of awakening, where the ego wears a robe of light and calls itself guide. To avoid this, we must cultivate something rarer than vision: discernment. Discernment is not skepticism. It is not cynicism. It is not intellectual arrogance. It is love sharpened by clarity. It is intuition refined by humility. It is silence strong enough to say, not everything that glows is gold. You do not need to reject the mystical. You need to test it. The ancient texts warned of this again and again. The mystics were not naive. They spoke of spirits who masquerade as angels, of visions that arise not from the soul, but from the wound, of revelations that inflate instead of liberate. In the Urantia book, this is echoed with calm clarity. Not all who speak in spiritual terms are anchored in higher truth. Not all channelings are free from distortion. The human mind, with its layered psychology and unconscious motives, is a porous vessel. It can receive light and also reflect its own unhealed parts, dressed as prophecy. So how do we know what is real? You start with quiet. Real truth never arrives shouting. It does not demand urgency. It does not flatter or coerce. It does not need to be believed instantly. It waits. It resonates. It invites. You feel it not as stimulation, but as recognition, a kind of cellular remembering. It may challenge you. It may not tell you what you want, but it will not manipulate your fear or inflate your pride. It will not claim exclusivity. It will make you more humble, not more special. You listen not only with the heart, but with the body. What contracts? What softens? What feels clear even if it is difficult? You ask yourself, does this teaching make me more whole or more divided? More grounded or more detached from reality? Does it empower my responsibility or outsource my authority to someone else? And you test the source, not by suspicion, by resonance over time. True teachings hold up. They don't unravel when questioned. True teachers invite your autonomy. They don't demand loyalty. They stay close to the human condition. They do not float above it. They are not perfect, but they are anchored. And when they speak of the invisible, they do so with reverence, not performance. Above all, you practice humility. Not the performance of humility, but the real thing, the willingness to not know, the openness to correction, the capacity to pause when others rush, the inner maturity to admit, I may be wrong, I may be projecting, I may not yet see clearly. This humility is not weakness. It is spiritual protection. It is what keeps you teachable, flexible, human. The deeper you go into the spiritual path, the more critical it becomes to develop tools that anchor perception without hardening the heart. Discernment is not something you acquire once and keep forever. It is a daily practice, a lifelong refinement. It is a sacred vigilance, a conscious weaving of silence, intuition, and logic that forms the inner compass for your walk with the invisible. Silence is where you begin. Not silence as absence of noise, but as space, a clearing, a state of receptive presence in which your projections begin to lose their grip. In silence, you hear not just what a message says, but how it resonates. You feel its texture, its density, its alignment or dissonance. Silence is where the ego's hunger quiets long enough for the soul to speak. Without silence, the spiritual path becomes a game of echoing voices, each louder than the last. But silence alone is not enough. You must also trust your intuition, not the impulsive reaction dressed as gut feeling, but the cultivated, nuanced, embodied sense of rightness that grows through time, error, and humility. Intuition is not instant certainty. It is attunement. It's the inner tuning fork that hums when something is aligned and wavers when it is not. But intuition must be cross-checked with logic, not because logic is superior, but because clarity needs structure to stay honest. Intuition without grounding can lead to delusion. Logic without intuition becomes sterile. Together, they create balance. You learn to test what comes to you. A vision, a message, an insight. Ask where it leads. Does it open or close your heart? Does it bring compassion or superiority? Does it deepen your responsibility or inflate your sense of specialness? The invisible does not contradict love. The more authentic a teaching is, the more it invites humility, service, and mystery. If it creates dependence, fear, or hierarchy, be cautious. If it cannot be questioned, it cannot be trusted. You are allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to pause. You are allowed to change your mind. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of spiritual maturity. Real growth often feels like unknowing, like shedding old certainties. The true initiate does not speak with louder conviction. They walk with quieter awareness. You will encounter false lights. You will encounter distorted teachings that carry a seed of truth wrapped in ego. That does not mean you must reject everything. It means you must feel carefully, walk slowly, remain in dialogue with your own soul, and above all, remain humble. Humility is not denial of power. It is the honest recognition of your place in the vastness. It is the willingness to bow before what cannot be mastered, to let go of being the one who knows, to become again and again a student, even after visions, even after deep awakenings, especially after them. The great protectors of the soul are not shields or systems. They are inner qualities, sincerity, patience, and humility. Sincerity keeps you honest. Patience keeps you from rushing into illusion. And humility keeps your flame clean. This is how you walk through an age of noise with your spirit intact, not untouched, but unbroken. And so we close this chapter in this book, not with warnings, but with remembering. You are not here to be perfect. You are not here to be impressive. You are here to be real, to walk in truth, even when it is subtle, to feel your way forward again and again, with the quiet courage of one who listens more than they speak. The false lights will fade, but your flame, if tended, will remain. And it is by that light you will recognize what is true. If this journey moved something in you, Comment below where you're from, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to the channel. Every day, we offer a new message to nourish the soul. The mystery continues. Walk gently, burn clean, stay human,